What I'm going to be doing is I have a Raspberry Pi 4. I believe it's a 4 gigabyte. Let me double check that real quick. Oh, it's an 8 gig Pi, which is overkill. A 4 gig Pi 4 is more than enough to do almost any emulation that you might want to do, especially for the retro games. You then go to retropie.org.uk and download the image you want. Yes, it can run on a Pi 1.0. It can run on a Pi 2, 3, like it says here. But if you want to be able to do some of the late 90s, early 2000 games, especially like the vector trace ones, you're going to want the Pi 4. You want that extra boost, especially with Vulkan. For those who don't know, Vulkan is a type of graphics rendering. It's basically an OpenGL competitor. Once you download the image, you can actually use some people use Balena Etcher, some people use, if they're not in Windows, they're using DDF and other things like that to do the image. I actually just use the Raspberry Pi Imager because because in the Raspberry Pi Imager, you can choose either RetroPie directly out of here, or your own image. Choose your storage. Make sure you choose the right storage. In this case, I am using a 128 gig Class 10 SD card. If you're going to be running this as a 100% nothing but RetroPie, I honestly suggest getting a case like this one here. It looks like an old NES unit, but the reason why is it actually has an SSD as well. And then that way you don't fry your SD card over time. So I'm going to go ahead and say right at this point. And this is going to take a while because it's almost a 1.2 gig image file it's got to write out to the card. RetroPie has Emulation Station as an add-on that you can do and a bunch of other add-ons. It's got a very, very in-depth community out there, and it contains a lot of the other emulators already in it. To be legal, it either needs to be a public domain game, which they do exist, or it has to be one that you legally own yourself. I have a shed out here that has about 4 different bins full of games. By the way, amazing controller for retro systems. Pretty much anything by 8-bit DO. This is the SN30 Pro Plus. There's also that they just came out with a new version of this, the Pro 2. And it feels like a PlayStation controller, and it has all the buttons you need, and it works natively over Bluetooth with RetroPie and other systems. It works with the Switch.
Since you're talking about the RetroPie, so I literally just set up my Raspberry Pi 4 last week, and I ran into so many problems. And my friend's like, you need to update your cores. Like Genesis, I was playing Sonic, it was stuttering. I'm like, this thing is so slow. But as soon as I went into the RetroPie menu, I forget where I went, but I updated cores. It took like 20 minutes, but it updated all these things, emulators, whatever. Yep. It worked beautifully.
Yeah, so the image that you download off the website is not always the latest. It contains all of the emulation cores, as you're calling them.
Right.
But it's not always going to be the latest and greatest. So that you run... One of the first steps you do on setup, which we will go through, I do have a HDMI capture, so I can put it on stream.
Oh, perfect.
One of the first things you're supposed to do is run the RetroPie update, and that will go out not only to RetroPie's GitHub and grab their information, but it'll go to the GitHubs for all of the emulators.
Man, I wish I knew that when I first started off. I was driving myself nuts.
Yes. That's pretty much how it is for anything anymore that is community source. If it's like even my little flipper here, the firmware I run on it, I still have to go out to all the sub sources and get the add-on images for those. I do run almost everything of mine via Wi-Fi. So the first thing I do after I get the image written to the card, is I pop the card out and then I pop it back in so I can get access to the boot partition, and I can add my WPA supplicant, enable SSH, and all that stuff. So to enable SSH on any Raspberry Pi image, well, I shouldn't use the word any, on the majority of them, all you got to do is drop a file on your boot partition called SSH.